This presentation is going to cover some of the preliminary results of my formal analysis, and it's going to share the capabilities of Shumla's Alexandria Project archive. So, as many of you likely already know, it is not advanced. Okay, there we go. A little slow. As many of you guys likely already know, the lower Pecos Canyonlands are located in southwestern Texas and northern Coahuila, Mexico. This archaeological region is known for extremely well-preserved archaeological deposits and highly complex prehistoric rock art painted in rock shelters, caves, and outcrops across the region. Hunter-gatherers first entered the lower Pecos Canyonlands approximately 10,000 years ago, but began rock art traditions around 4,000 years ago. Researchers have identified 5 different rock art styles present in this region: Pecos River style, red linear style, red monochrome style, bold line geometric style, and historic period rock art. The most common, and at this point, the most studied rock art style is Pecos River style. This highly complex polychromatic pictograph tradition, radiocarbon dated to 2000 BC through 700 AD, includes highly stylized anthropomorphs, or human-like figures, zoomorphs, or animal-like figures, and abstract enigmatic figures composed into complex, multi-layered compositions. In many cases, specific attributes or individual figures or motifs are consistently and similarly depicted at different sites. Documentation of these attributes and patterns allows for iconographic and interpretive analyses of rock art panels across the lower Pecos. Recent interpretive research completed by Dr. Carolyn Boyd, Shumla's founder and head of research, indicates that Pecos River style murals form complex and interwoven visual narratives. These visual narratives convey mythologies and stories related to archaic core concepts of Uto-Aztecan speaking peoples, including the Nahua, also known as the Aztecs, and the Huichol of Mesoamerica. Dr. Boyd's analysis indicates that these archaic core concepts and the corresponding iconography were established in the lower Pecos as early as 4,000 years ago, before the fluorescence of the Nahua and the Maya agricultural societies in Mesoamerica. So in an effort to digitally preserve these complex visual narratives, Shumla recently completed the Alexandria Project. This 4-year baseline documentation effort documented 235 rock art sites across the lower Pecos Canyonlands. We applied a range of both low and high-tech methods to create a baseline digital record at each documented site. The resulting digital data set, named the Alexandria Project Archive, is a comprehensive iconographic and visual record that enables Shumla and other researchers to complete groundbreaking research on a large sample of an entire, or not an entire archaeological region, the Texas side of this archaeological region. The archive includes a wide range of data types. The first is high-resolution stitched gigapanorama imagery. Gigapanoramas are composed, it's a single composite image composed of a series of high-resolution images that are stitched together into a single image. And they're so high resolution that they allow us to closely examine rock art figures and attributes. Scaled 3-dimensional models allow us to measure rock art figures and panels. Detailed site and rock art photography help us understand the overall context of the site and different iconographic attributes. Site and panel maps and GPS locations assist with geospatial analyses of rock art sites within the landscape. And Shumla's rock art site form database facilitates iconographic and interpretive analyses of rock art panels across the entire region. So one of the most powerful tools in the archive is Shumla's rock art site form database. The rock art site form collects 220 different data fields at each documented site. And this information includes the site condition, rock art panel orientations, panel measurements and figure counts, rock art style descriptions, an overview site narrative, and an iconographic inventory of commonly observed attributes and motifs. So we compiled all of these individual rock art site forms together into a single searchable rock art site form database for all 235 sites. So I'm using the Alexandria Project archive to complete my formal analysis of the Pecos River style winged anthropomorph. I find this type of figure just really fascinating, and I was able to use the rock art site form database to specifically locate these figures at sites across the region. So Pecos River style murals include avian-like attributes like wings on a lot of different figures. They appear on anthropomorphs, of course on zoomorphs, and they even appear sometimes on enigmatic figures. Winged anthropomorphs and avian zoomorphs can be especially difficult to distinguish and classify because they can share multiple attributes that can be similarly depicted, such as a head, a torso, legs, and avian-like wings. So for the purposes of my analysis, I needed to create a definition of, what defines a Pecos River style winged anthropomorph. So for the purposes of my analysis, my current working definition is that a Pecos River style winged anthropomorph displays both anthropomorphic and avian zoomorphic attributes. The figure must display at least 3 anthropomorphic attributes, such as a torso, arms and legs, digits, head, hair, or other adornments, and paraphernalia are what the figure might be holding or wielding. And all this in addition to the avian-like attribute of wings. And in Pecos River style, the wings of these winged anthropomorphs are often depicted using 2 painting conventions: avian-like wings, similar to avian zoomorphs, and bar-shaped wings, which I'll go into the detail a little bit later. So the broad research questions that are kind of guiding my analysis: how do Pecos River style artists depict or convey wings on these winged anthropomorphs? What are the common attributes observed on these types of figures? What is the geographic distribution and density of these figures across the region? And what are the compositional contexts in which Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs are depicted? So to start my project, I queried the Shumla rock art site form database to locate and list at which sites winged anthropomorphs are present. I then used high resolution imagery from these sites to identify, classify, and describe each winged anthropomorph and its context within the mural. I then collected 16 different types of attribute data for each winged anthropomorph based on fields from the rock art site form iconographic inventory. I think you guys can see my mouse here. This shows my Excel spreadsheet where I'm tracking, the attributes that I'm collecting for each of the winged anthropomorphs. Some of the data that I collected were more for the overall site. What is the shelter orientation? What is the panel orientation that the figure is located on? And then other attributes I looked at were more specific, of course, to the winged anthropomorph figure. For example, I looked at the wing type. I looked at the body positioning. Is the figure, full-bodied or half-bodied? Is it upright? Is it diagonal, sideways, upside down? I looked at attributes like adornments. Does it have a headdress or wrist adornments or elbow adornments? What is the figure wielding? What paraphernalia is the figure holding? In this case, this figure has a power bundle. It's also got an atlatl here with an extra dart. So these are the type of attributes that I was collecting to compare across the different sites. So once I collected my attribute data for all of the winged figures, I ran very basic presence-absence percentages for certain attribute categories, mostly to get a preliminary insight into these figures and inform further attribute analysis. And last but certainly not least, I plotted the identified sites in GIS, Geographic Information Systems, to examine their distribution and density across the landscape. So I identified 23 rock art sites across the lower Pecos with Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs present in total and so far. After my first pass through the analysis, I've included 58 examples of Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs in this study. So one of the first things that I did was that I identified 3 broad wing types and categories that I used to classify the winged anthropomorphs: avian-like, bar-shaped, and other type wings. I really kept my classification categories broad at this early stage of formal analysis, but as I kind of refine wing types and observe new examples and new attributes, I'm really expecting that these categories might split into subtypes or into entirely new categories. So of the 58 anthropomorphs, winged anthropomorphs currently included in the study, 22 were depicted with avian-like wings, 18 are depicted with these bar-shaped wings, and 19 are depicted with an other wing type. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to kind of go into more detail about some of the common attributes for figures in each of these wing type classifications. So the first is avian-like wing types. And like the name suggests, these winged anthropomorphs are depicted with avian-like wings, very similar in artistic convention to the way Pecos River style artists depict avian zoomorphs. Avian-like type wings often include a series of vertical lines or fringe or feathers extending below the horizontal line of the arms. So in these 2 examples pictured here, you can see there's this yellow line and this yellow line with red dots on top. Those are kind of the top of the wing. And then you have these red lines extending downward on either side. This figure is similar. It's got those arms extended out, and it has kind of the arm line extends and bends down into one of the vertical lines. So I did notice that, as you can see in these 2 examples, there was some variation. Most of the arms were extended straight out, like you would see with an avian zoomorph, but sometimes the execution was just slightly different, which I found pretty interesting. For this avian-like wing type, all 22 figures were depicted frontally facing. The majority were painted in an upright position. The majority of them were full-bodied, painted with a head, torso, wings, legs, and many of them were center-styled. And center styling is a term that Shumla uses that kind of signifies that the figure is painted with multiple colors or with designs in the central body, or outlining around the outside of the figure. So for avian-like zoomorphs, the majority of them were center-styled. And again, these arms just usually extend straight out. There was slight variation. Sometimes the wings would be angled slightly upward or slightly downward, but always extended straight out. Something that was really interesting that surprised me about my first pass through the data set was that these avian-like winged figures, the vast majority were not painted with adornments or wielding paraphernalia. I found this very interesting because when I initially worked to develop my definition for a winged anthropomorph and distinguish them from avian zoomorphs, I thought, oh, this will be easy. The winged anthropomorphs will have adornments and paraphernalia. And when I did my preliminary presence absence, I found that actually wasn't the case. So I found this surprising and interesting. And so I'm really looking forward to returning to these figures, looking more broadly at the concept, the context around them, and make sure that I didn't miss any paraphernalia that is associated with these figures. So the next wing type that I classified was bar-shaped wings. This one is really common, and it depicts kind of this bar shape on either side of the torso, forming a T shape. So you can kind of see here, there's this bar-shaped wing, the central body, the head, bar-shaped wing, central body, little feet in there, and the same here. Wing, bar-shaped wings, central body, 2 arms. Like the avian type wing. All bar-shaped wings in the sample are depicted as frontally facing and they're oriented upright. 2/3 of my sample were center styled with multiple colors or designs, while 1/3 of them were just infilled with a single color, predominantly red. The majority of these figures were full-bodied, painted with head, torso, bar-shaped wings, arms, legs. You can kind of see these ones. This one has little legs hanging down that you can't quite see very clearly, but little arms up here. But a good number of my sample they were half-bodied. They did not have legs. In this example down here, this figure has the bar-shaped wings, the central body, a little head, and arms, but it does not have legs. So there's kind of an interesting pattern happening with the body type. Unlike avian type wings, if avian type wings, their arms are their wings. These figures tend to have those bar-shaped wings and little arms extending above the wings. You can see in these circles here, there's a little arm right here that extends above that bar-shaped wing. And in this figure, there's 2 little arms extending above that bar-shaped wing. This is kind of an interesting aspect of these bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs, is that they have both arms and wings. These figures, these bar-shaped wing figures, the presence or absence of adornments or paraphernalia kind of straddled the middle. Some bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs were more simply executed and didn't have paraphernalia or adornments, while others were highly elaborate with their adornment and their attributes. For example, this figure, it's got this really interesting paraphernalia holding this arm, has a staff. It's got these adornments down here that extend down below. Whereas this figure depicted here is really kind of very simply executed without paraphernalia or adornments. So some variation in this wing type. So one of, I think, a really interesting part of these bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs is that there is a very highly recognizable bar-shaped winged anthropomorph depicted in these 4 examples shown here. They're painted with strikingly similar attributes in at least 3 sites in my sample. Note that these figures all have those bar-shaped wings right here, right there, and right there. They also have kind of this recurrent square or rounded shape in the facial area. Shumla classifies that as a mask. This figure has a black one, this one's whiter, negative space, another white or negative space, and another black mask. All 4 of these have these antler headdresses. You can see here. This one's a little harder to see. There's also these tiny little rounded protrusions on either side of the head. Shumla kind of colloquially calls those teddy bear ears, but all of them have those little protrusions. And there's also this presence of a motif called single pole ladders that I'll talk about in the next slide. There's one of them right here. They're present in the wings here, all around this figure. So with such similar execution and a similar suite of attributes, these figures likely depict a specific character within the archaic core mythology and iconography. And so I'm really looking forward to examining these figures more closely and diving into the ethnographies and the mythologies for further interpretation. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, is that these bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs were observed in context with a motif that we call a single pole ladder. And this is what that looks like. There's a central line and kind of crossing horizontal lines. Now, single pole ladders are observed in Lower Pecos rock art in many iconographic contexts, but in one of those contexts appears to be with bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs. They appear either, extending from the wings. In this kind of poorly preserved example that's enhanced with D-stretch, you can see there's tiny little single pole ladders extending from the entire outside of the wing. There's also some kind of surrounding the lower body. In this figure over here, there's single pole ladders just surrounding this figure. They're even kind of up here around the head. So that's kind of an interesting iconographic attribute that I'm curious to learn more about, is how is the single pole ladder and the bar-shaped anthropomorph, what do they mean together? So I'm really looking forward to diving into that a little bit more. So the other wing type category is my preliminary catch-all category for all unusual winged anthropomorph examples. And this category kind of includes 3 subgroups. The very unusual types that I'm not sure are wings, insect-like wings, and a possible new type of wings with crenelated arches that might serve as the wings. Like the other 2 wing types, avian-like and bar-shaped, these anthropomorphs are depicted frontally facing and full-bodied, and the majority of them are center-styled, and most have their arms extended out. So all 3 of these categories have kind of that core group of attributes that are similar: frontally facing, full-bodied, arms extended out. But for these figures, while most of them had some kind of headdress or hair, a lot of them did not have adornments or paraphernalia associated with them. But now I'm going to go into 2 of kind of my interesting other type categories. And the first are insect-like wings. I observed at least 3 examples of possible insect-like wings on 3 different Pecos River style anthropomorphs from 2 sites. This example in this larger picture here is kind of unique because it has 2 sets of wings. It has these bar-shaped wings that you can see right here, and it also has these really elaborate insect-like wings that closely resemble the wings of a butterfly or a moth. In this example lower here, it's not quite as nicely preserved and is a little more challenging to discern, but you can see that there's these kind of protrusions out here that might be kind of an insect-like wing, like a moth or a butterfly. The other kind of other interesting wing type would be something that Shumla classifies as a crenelated arch, serving as a figure's wings. These are highly unusual, and I think I'm still deciding about them. But Shumla uses the term a crenelated arch to classify a certain type of enigmatic figure that you can see here in this illustration. It's an arch shape. It can be oriented upward or downward or sideways, but it has these kind of crenellations, or these lobes along the outside. And so with these 2 examples, this one is a little challenging to see. It's pretty poorly preserved, but you have this central body of an anthropomorph, and you have a very small head, antlers, and then where arms would be, you have that crenelated arch shape. You can see I'm kind of outlining it here on this side and outlining it here on the other side. I wasn't able to determine if this figure had arms. So, are the crenelated arches serving as the figure's arms or wings? Something I'm still deciding on. This other example has that central anthropomorphic figure right here. Central torso, a head, some antlers, and unlike this figure over here, there are 2 little arms sticking out above the crenelated arch. It's really kind of challenging to see with so much paint in the area and a lot of post-painting modification. So this type of wing would be, on these 2 figures, would be really highly unusual and also highly stylized. Pecos River style anthropomorphs are often depicted in a stratigraphic relationship with arches, but the placement of these arches with these 2 figures may indicate that they are intended as the figure's arms or intended as the figure's wings. So at this early stage of my analysis, I'm keeping these figures classified as another wing type. I don't want to rule out, I'm going to include them in my sample because I don't want to rule out other possible conventions, painting conventions that Pecos River style artists might have used to portray wings. So So those are kind of the three major types of wings that I looked at in the lower Pecos for Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs. Another part of my formal analysis is that I looked at the site distribution and density of these sites on the landscape to possibly look for patterning. Rock art, is, as all of you know, is really situated in its landscape. And to better understand the context of Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs, I plotted the sites using GIS on the landscape. So this map shows the distribution of all documented sites as part of the Alexandria Project in these gray circles. You can see that the sites kind of cluster along the three major river systems in the region, the Pecos, the Devils, and the Rio Grande River. The sites in orange are the sites that contain at least one Pecos River style winged anthropomorph. Some sites only had one winged anthropomorph, while others had multiple and displayed a lot of flight imagery. This is just a really basic geospatial distribution, but with it, I didn't really observe any clear patterning. The sites appear distributed across all three major river systems. And so, it didn't really tell me that much besides that it's distributed across the region. I am planning to do further analyses with more fine-grained data about the site's location. I'm really interested in looking at the overall shelter orientation, the individual panel orientation on which the winged anthropomorphs are painted, and the view shed from these sites. Perhaps those attributes will help me learn more about why Pecos River style artists painted winged anthropomorph figures at certain sites. So that's forthcoming. So this information is really the preliminary results of my analysis. I have a long way to go, and I'm pretty excited to keep going. One of the first things I'm going to do is expand my attribute analysis to include additional data. About halfway through, I realized I wasn't collecting enough. I was collecting a lot of information, but Dr. Boyd and other researchers in this area are, she always says all these attributes carry meaning. And so you need to make sure that you capture those so that you are, getting the full picture of each figure. So I'm going to be adding more attribute categories that I'm going to look at for all 58 figures. And I'm also going to expand my analysis to the immediate surrounding context around the winged anthropomorphs. Pecos River style murals are complex compositions, and winged anthropomorphs are a part of that composition. So it's going to be important to look at the associated figures and also that wider composition. One of my favorite parts of this process is going to be doing layered illustrations for each of the winged anthropomorphic figures. Dr. Boyd and other rock art researchers strongly recommend illustrating figures, because as you're illustrating them, you can really see that figure, and you can help better determine their full extent, the attributes, and their context. Throughout this process, I'm also going to be refining my working definition for what is a Pecos River style winged anthropomorph, how do I define them, as well as how do I define the different wing types and how did I classify figures into those wing types. Another exciting aspect I'm looking forward to is I'm going to be diving into resources about the iconography and mythology of Native American groups in the American Southwest and in Mesoamerica. These resources will really help form the foundation for further interpretive work of the winged anthropomorph and its context in Pecos River style. And that's one of the illustrations. That's kind of what it'll look like as I go ahead and do those for all 58 figures. So I'd like to take a quick moment here to thank my colleagues at Shumla, particularly Dr. Spielman, Dr. Daring, and Dr. Carolyn Boyd, as well as Tim Murphy, for their assistance and support throughout my analysis. I'd also like to thank Jessica and Emil for all their work on these Lunch and Learn events. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this presentation. I'm looking forward to talking with you guys about it more. Thank you all very much.
I'm sure we have questions, so please don't be shy. Feel feel free to take yourself off mute and just either, or you can also use the little raise your hand function, and Audrey will be happy to answer.
It's Mike Webb.
Hello.
Quick question. You restricted it strictly to Pecos River style?
I did. I know that there's other, winged figures and even, avian zoomorphs in the other styles, but I was really, really interested in the Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs. I found the mixing kind of attributes of both avian and human-like really interesting. One of the figures that I was really drawn to when I first came here was a winged anthropomorph figure. So yes, I only looked at Pecos River style winged anthropomorph figures. Oh, and I see a question over here in the chat from Chester. It says, there are at least 2 of those figures that had speech breath. Are you looking into that too? Yes, so speech breath was one of the categories that I was looking into. Yes, no, or unknown as my a part of my attribute analysis. Yeah, there was the one figure that had like tiny dots of speech breath coming. I didn't see a mouth, but it could be there. I'm excited to illustrate that figure to see if there is a mouth present. And yeah, so I'm very excited to continue that work. I know if you guys haven't seen yet, Dr. Carolyn Boyd and her co-author Ashley Busby recently wrote a paper about speech breath. And Jessica and Emil, correct me if I'm wrong, is that available yet for people to see?
Yes, it's in Latin American antiquity, and we can send you, when we send you the follow-up email with the link to the recording for this video, we'll also send you the link to that paper. It's truly incredible. Your brain will explode.
So yeah, some of these figures also have speech breath.
Audrey, I've got a question about the so-called Triad Panel in Fate Bell.
Mm-hmm.
The central figure, which has the bar wings, do you consider the objects coming out of the back, the fingers and the hands of that figure?
Let me pull up that figure again. I'm going to share my screen again just so I can pull up that picture. So you were saying that these protrusions?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, I think that those are the figure's arms. There's
Okay.
kind of this area, and then there's these tiny digits. It's not showing up really clearly in this picture, but this figure is wielding paraphernalia, power bundle in the one hand. And so, yeah, I think those kind of things extending above the bar-shaped wings are hands.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
How often are these winged anthropomorphs associated with avian zoomorphs? That's really interesting. I have actually, sometimes the avian zoomorphs will appear surrounding an anthropomorphic figure. They're kind of heraldic. They're like surrounding the figure, and I've always classified those as avian zoomorphs. When I was looking at winged anthropomorphs, a lot of times they don't appear with other, they don't appear with avian zoomorphs. Sometimes like the bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs, I'm noticing that they kind of cluster. So there'll be like 2 or 3 of them in an area. Or sometimes the winged anthropomorphs are almost like a supporting or a heraldic kind of grouping around a central figure. At one site, there's a very long central figure, and it's got bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs. It's got 4 of them, one on either side, one on either side. So I actually haven't seen a lot of association of winged anthropomorphs with avian zoomorphs. It seems like they kind of keep them separate. That really is a very preliminary, observation. I really do need to do more contextual analysis around the winged anthropomorph figure to be sure. But that's my initial thought.
I have a quick question on the single pole ladder motif.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if we have found any evidence that the people were using single pole ladders, or if there's some kind of cognitive connection with the motif being associated with flight, or at least like raising to a higher level or something like that.
Yeah. So I honestly can't speak to whether I'm not sure if we found any examples of physical single pole ladders in the lower Pecos. And we could get some more information to you about that. I do think, just from my own personal observations, the single pole ladder appears in so many different contexts. I think it's one of those symbols that it means different things in association with whatever it is shown with. So the single pole ladder, this is just a theory, of course, is that I think the single pole ladder and its association with bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs means something. But if a single pole ladder is depicted, of course, in another context, it might mean something different. So that's kind of, I found it really interesting that those single pole ladders really are mostly appearing around those bar-shaped winged anthropomorphs. I didn't really see it around the avian type winged anthropomorphs. So hopefully that answers part of your question, and we can get back to you about whether there's evidence of single pole ladders, in the archaeological deposits.
I don't remember, oops, my video is not on. I don't remember hearing about archaeological evidence specifically of single pole ladders. Amanda, you might be able to talk to this too. But yeah, no, she says none that I know of. It doesn't mean they weren't using them. They could have very easily used them until they were unusable and then turned them into firewood, so yeah.
I might mention this about the single pole ladders. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, one interpretation of the single pole ladders associated with the bar-shaped wings was that they were flight symbols. Now, I don't know if that's carried on since that time, 20 plus years ago or not.
Yeah, I think it's very possible because they appear in that context with flight. So I'm definitely going to look into it some more when I get more into the interpretive side of my formal analysis. Here it says, is the Shumla database available online? So at this point, the Shumla rock art site form database is not available online. If a researcher is interested to use the rock art site form database, they would need to come to Shumla and work with us here. We'd have a data use waiver and whatnot, but you'd have to kind of come to Shumla to use that database to complete analyses. In the very near future, we are planning to open a researcher workstation at Shumla's San Marcos office. So we don't have to come all the way to Comstock, although it's beautiful. But in the San Marcos office, there's going to be a dedicated workstation where researchers will be able to access the rock art site form database for their research. In the distant, not so distant future, but kind of a goal going forward is that eventually Shumla's rock art site form database will be accessible online to accredited researchers. They would have to pass through kind of, submit their research design and whatnot to a review committee for approval, and then they would receive a secured password and login. And then you could do Lower Pecos rock art research as a researcher from anywhere. So we're making those baby steps right now, Comstock, in the near future, San Marcos and Comstock. And then one day, a very secure online access platform for the rock art site form database. Then here we go. So hopefully that answered that question. Let's see, a few more comments here. Can I go into a bit of geographic description? Are they located on boulders, on the ground surface, or high on the cliffs? Okay, yeah, so a preliminary thought is that most of these winged anthropomorphs are painted in rock shelters. I've seen some lower on the wall or middle or high, but I really haven't observed one in a boulder out in the open air. They're usually part of that wider Pecos River style composition in rock shelters. Let me see, did I answer that? Yeah, so they're definitely in rock shelters. They're usually incorporated in with the broader composition. But I am curious to see if they're high on the wall. So that's going to be a part of my broader contextual analysis for each figure, is really zooming, you get so into the individual attributes of the figure because they are so important, but it's also important to for me to step back. I can't be in the figure's business all the time. I need to step back out, look at the context within the composition. I need to look at its location on the panel. I need to look at the direction that the panel faces. That might be something that's significant. So I'm really looking forward to looking into all those other aspects and attributes. Okay, and then there's another question. Out of all the Alexandria database that you've looked at so far, I've identified 38 winged figures. It was 58 winged figures. So I had a few of those I'm still questioning whether I'm considering them winged anthropomorphs, but my current number is 58 total. Oh yes, and I see that I've read that, yep, single pole ladders. Yeah, I did see that article about single pole ladders possibly representing dragonflies. So it's a really interesting motif. I think in its simplicity, there's such complexity. So I'm definitely curious to see how it relates to winged anthropomorphs. Here soon. Oh, I see. Sorry, Chester. Yes. So I identified 58 winged anthropomorph figures at 23 sites. Some sites had only one winged anthropomorph and others had like 6 or 8. So it seems some sites have more flight imagery than others. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to look at in the future too. Why is there so much flight imagery depicted at this? What percentage of the anthropomorphs are winged? I haven't looked at that yet. That is something that I'm writing down to look at. It's like, oh yeah, ants that are winged. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'll have to look into that. I think my thought is it's going to be a small number, but a smaller percentage. But I could be surprised. The winged anthropomorphs have surprised me before. So that's okay. No, Chester said in the chat, looks like we're loading your wagon, but I am excited about it. So it's been fun every time diving in, as you all probably can agree that the rock art here is just so incredibly complex, and it's just such a wonderful thing to learn about and learn from. So I'm excited. Load up the wagon. Let's go.
It's hard to pick just one to say, okay, I'm going to focus on winged anthropomorphs. I mean, there's just so much there. It would be so easy to just get overwhelmed. Oh, and I'm sure that it's going to expand because everything is so connected, and these figures are so interwoven and pulled together into some composition of a larger story. So I'm sure it's just going to grow from here. Absolutely. We probably have time for, oh, Marie, you have a question.
I do. Speaking of larger stories, I'm curious about how the Pecos River style winged anthropomorphs fit within the context of rock art around the world. And so I wondered, how common are winged anthropomorphs just in rock art across the world? Would this be a kind of maybe an archetypal symbol or something that reflects something about human nature or the human psyche or human archetypes, or are winged anthropomorphs more a distinct feature of Pecos River style art that sort of stands apart from rock art elsewhere? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I think it's a really good question. I can't quite speak to, do other rock art styles have winged anthropomorphs? I have seen a lot of figures that combine both human and animal attributes, and I think birds are a big part of that. It's a really good question. I don't know if I can answer that right now. I would say probably the idea of a human avian kind of conflation is not necessarily archetypal to the Lower Pecos, but I do think that the way that the Lower Pecos artists are conveying or portraying wings is pretty interesting and kind of specific to this region, of course. You know, you have that really, I wouldn't say obvious, but it seems avian-like is, oh yeah, those are wings. Those are really clearly wings. But then you also have something that might be a more stylized convention, like those bar shapes or possibly those crenelated arches. So I think that that would be perhaps something that is more, you know, not specific, but archetypal to this region. But I really like that question. I think that's something that I should look into. You know, is this something that is specific to the Lower Pecos, or is that kind of a wider phenomenon with human societies around the world? So,
yeah. I know that when Carolyn was doing her speech breath research and the motif of having dots or lines emanating from or coming into the mouth of the figures in the Lower Pecos, at first it seemed like, you know, it was unique to the Lower Pecos, but when they started really looking in other places, they realized it was everywhere and hadn't necessarily been associated with that specific, you know, expressing or you know, in a pictography of speech or breath. So yeah, I think not only can we learn from other rock art styles and folks, but we might bring something to them too, where they realize something new.
Oh, and yes, I also see Carolyn, she mentioned that the Birdman is a prominent figure in Mississippian art, not rock art, but mostly later. So that's a good point.
Yeah. Jim, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, let me ask you this question about the bar-shaped figures. Are most of the bar-shaped figures located in Seminole Canyon and west of that canyon?
You know, I have to think about that a little bit. I think
I'd have to look at the map now.
yeah, I'd have to look at the map. Well, I do have a map. Let me.
Most of the ones I've seen are in Seminole and west of Seminole and up the Pecos, but not too many east of Seminole Canyon.
I feel like there was one in the Devil's River State Natural Area when we were there, and that's a bit far.
Yeah.
I remember it being really hard to see. We didn't notice it really closely until we used the D-stretch.
I know I have quite a few listed over by the Devil's River. I've got, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 winged anthropomorphs. From my map right now, I can't quite tell. I can't quite tell if what type of wing type they have, but that is something interesting to look at. Is, you know, mapping the wing type will be critical, because, you know, what if all the avian or all the bar shaped are only in Seminole and West, and all the avian are over here? I think that would be something that would be really interesting.
Similar to the U-shaped head shape, or the rabbit ear, what we call sometimes the rabbit ear headdress. They do seem to be geographically located thus far, based on study.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to know if the wings was the same.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's one more comment in the chat.
Oh, another question there.
I'd love to see if there are more connections.
Oh, I see. Yeah, between the Lower Pecos and the Southeast, though it seems more tenuous than the Southwest and Mesoamerica. I think we should be looking at all kinds, with iconography, you know, I think we should be looking at as many different cultures as we can. You know, a lot of times people thought that the Lower Pecos was a little bit isolated, but I think that, you know, recent research has shown how much is happening, you know, how much transmission is going on. So definitely something to look into.
Absolutely. So much more to learn.
Yeah.
It's going to be incredible.
Thank you all so much again for joining us and for listening to the presentation. It was so nice to talk with you guys after as well.
Yes, thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to have you, and we'll continue to do these so that we can see you again and again. Awesome. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.